One of the greatest travesties and injustices our world has ever known is slavery. When I mean slavery, I mean illegitimate bondage. Holding somebody captive and forcing them to do what you want them to do instead of what they want to do. And I'm so grateful and this is, slavery, by the way, has been a travesty in our world and in our nation. And I'm grateful for freedom. I'm grateful for God's freedom of us spiritually, and sometimes slavery is us as spiritual beings where things get a hold of us and take us captive and don't want to let go. I'm thankful for Jesus' freedom, and I'm thankful to belong to a nation that said we're not going to have any part of it. In 1863, January 1 of that year, the Emancipation Proclamation was put in place that Abraham Lincoln had announced in September a few months before. And that proclamation set all slaves free legally. Nobody could hold them in captivity and force them into labor any longer. But there was something interesting that happened after the Emancipation Proclamation. First is that there were some slaves that chose not to leave slavery. And they decided that because they were in a known environment. In fact, all they had ever known, and from generations prior to them, was being slaves. So it's like they were secure and comfortable in that setting. And so they chose to remain in bondage rather than live in freedom and maximize their potential. There was something else interesting that happened. Not everybody got the word that they were free. And in fact, there was, in the town of Galveston, Texas, slaves still present. They had never heard about this freedom. And the only way they found out is that U.S. troops showed up to help set them free and to let them know that they're now able to live life how they wanted and go where they want to go. Nobody was going to be in control of them any longer. But they were slaves still because nobody had told them they were free. And I tell you this story because it leads us into today's message as we continue where we started last week of reality. And I want you to just think about this thought for a moment, is that when you don't know the truth, you can actually be legally saved and free, but in illegitimate bondage. That is both naturally and it's spiritually. I want you to see this thought. When you know and choose to live in line with God's truth, you thrive. But the opposite is true as well. What is God wanting us to do in these two messages? He's wanting to show you the truth. We're going to define it as a better reality than what this world offers. But He wants you to know it in hopes that you choose it and you thrive. Because as Christians, we can be legally saved. Jesus paid the price, but yet He said we can choose bondage. You can call it an addiction. You can call it a stronghold. You can call it a way of thinking. But yet, Jesus said you're free. But God also wants to help some of you know, because you may not know. In some of these messages, He's given us a vision of what's better out there. And you may go, I didn't know that. I didn't know that was available to me. We did a few messages a few weeks ago called Happy. And I think sometimes watching Christians, it's like they think this life has to be drudgery. And God is saying, no, I want you happy. I want you happy being a Christian. I want you happy in me. I know the world is hard, but there's a joy you can have in me. And you may go, I didn't know that. And He wants you to know so you can choose to live it and you thrive and you find God's best for you. Let's go to Jesus' words in John. We're going to go first to John chapter 8, beginning in verse 31. It says, Jesus was saying to those Jews who had believed, and I want you to hang on to that word believed with me through that message because we're going to come back to it. It says, those who believed Him. It says, if you continue in my word, you are truly disciples of mine, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. I wonder if the slaves in Galveston would have loved the news of the freedom 2.5 years earlier. Let's not miss any more time by not knowing the truth. Let's hear what God is saying, because He wants you to be free. Now, they answered Him, and He was talking to the religious leaders, a very arrogant and not so good bunch, even though they were representing God. They say this quote, we're Abraham's descendants, and we've never been enslaved to anyone. That's a lie. If you look at their history, from the time God had set them free from Egypt, they had been enslaved multiple times. And in fact, at that moment, they were under Roman rule. So here they're like even deceived in their life, thinking, oh, we're free, we can do whatever we want. No, they couldn't. Now, why were they deceived? They had some freedoms. The Romans allowed them to do certain things. They could still worship God. They could still have the temple. There were things they could still do. So there were freedoms, but it was limited. So they called that freedom and say, we've never been slaves. But they were deceived naturally, and what even Jesus told them is they were deceived spiritually because they were in bondage. And so they go on to say, how is it that you say you will become free? And Jesus answered them, truly, truly, I say to you, everyone who commits sin, lives a life that has consistent sin in it, is the slave of sin. And He was basically telling them, you're slaves, and you don't even realize it. But He said, if you'll listen to my truth, you can actually find freedom. And what Jesus was doing was making a distinction because God's truth. And I want you to think of truth with these two words, a better reality. A better reality. And we're going to dive into that a little bit more. But this better reality leads to a better life. But the devil, through the world, offers an alternate reality that Jesus calls a lie. He said it's not true. And that lie leads to bondage and death. He says it this way in John 10:10. You probably know this verse well. The thief comes only to kill and steal and destroy. But Jesus come that He may have, come on, say it with me, life and have it abundantly. Doesn't that sound good? I'll take life and an abundance of it. It's kind of like the Thanksgiving meal. You don't just get a plate of something, you got multiple plates of something. Come on. But that's what God offers. It's like the buffet of goodness. But too often in our world, we settle for scraps thinking that is good. But here's the problem. The devil doesn't come say, no, look, what I'm offering you is really bad. It's really going to mess you up. It's going to get you all addicted. It's going to destroy your life, destroy your marriage, destroy your kids, destroy your finances. That's what I have to offer you. Why? Because nobody would take that. He's a good salesman. He pretties it up. He makes it look nice. It's like it's a rusted, broken down car, but he puts some paint over it. Cleans up the engine on the outside. But the moment you pull off the lot, the thing falls apart. See, he knows how to make it look good. And that's the lie. That's the deception. And what is the lie? It's good for you. It'll make you happy. But he just wants to manipulate you. I want to talk to all the parents just for a moment, whether young kids or grown kids. What if you had somebody that was trying to deceive your child into a harmful lifestyle? Some of you may have had that happen. May even be happening now. What would you do? Would you sit back and go, man, that's just sad. They're trying to go after my kid. Man, I hate that. I hope they make it. I hope they just remember everything I've ever told them and they do well. Would you do that? Well, if you did, I don't think you love them. What would you do? You would do everything in your power to show them what is happening, that they're being manipulated and being deceived. And you would try to show them that what they're being deceived into is harmful for them. And what would you paint for them? A better reality. You would tell them the truth of where that goes. That's what God's trying to do with us. He's saying, I'm trying to get your attention. I know what you're seeing, and even what you're doing right now seems good. It feels good. But it's going to kill you. And I need you to listen to me. He's trying to get our attention. So here's a thought we began with last week, is that God's truth is reality, and the enemy's lies are unreality. And you choose which one to follow. God's not going to make you choose. And the follow-up is that your chosen reality determines how you see and live life. So here's what reality is like. It's how you see what life is all about. For you, what is life about? We all, I think, have the question in our life, what's my purpose? But I think we also have this thought of, what is life really about? Why am I here? Well, your reality is how you see what that is. Your reality is what you pursue in life. What are you going after? I know you got to go to a job every day, but that's not what you're after. What are you after in this life? What are you wanting life to give you? Reality is like, how do you cope with life? How are you handling life and what this world offers and as you go on a day-to-day basis? That's your reality. And it's how you choose to find your identity. It's how you find your purpose. It's how you find your security. It's how you find your happiness. It's how you choose to do that. And it pertains to every part of life. Even God. What do you think about God? Because we all have our own views of God. And sometimes they're not real. Sometimes we see God as an angry God. Some we see God as a distant God or an uncaring God. Sometimes we just think God, He just wants more and more. It's how reality is how we see our finances, how we handle money. It's how our health is, our relationships, everything that we do. Our reality pertains to all of life. So last week, I gave you some homework, and I'm surprised you came back. And we even got some more students this morning. Come on, this is awesome. And so you may not have done homework last week, but I'm going to ask you the question anyway. What do you see about yourself? For those of you who were here last week or heard the message, what did you see about your life? What did you see what your reality was? And let me give you a statement to kind of help you gauge this, is that your routine, your responses, and your reactions reveal your reality. Think about your routines, what you do on a regular basis. That reveals your reality. Or your response to people. Maybe how they treat you, good or bad, but especially bad. How you choose to respond, that reviews your reality of your thinking, your reaction when things go a certain way, good or bad. That reveals who you really are and what you really think. We're always going to experience pleasure. We're going to experience pain. We're going to experience pressure. And when those things come to us, how we respond to them is our reality. And I want you to see this thought is that the reality you pursue determines the direction and the outcome of your life. And that's why these messages are so very important. Let me talk about the Israelites for a little bit. Some of y'all know the story. But God chose a man named Abraham and said, hey, through you, I'm going to create a nation of people. And so he, in his old age, he and his wife have a child, Isaac. Isaac goes on to have a child, Jacob. Jacob has 12 sons who become the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, those 12 brothers, as families go, were a little contentious, all right? If you got brothers, you know. You love each other, but you hate each other, right? And so they didn't like Joseph. Joseph was a dreamer. God had showed him some things, and Joseph was a little bit braggadocious about it, and the brothers didn't like it. And so they actually sold him into slavery. That's a bad brother right there. And so he goes to Egypt as a slave. Well, through God-ordained circumstances, which are crazy, he ends up becoming number 2 in charge of the nation right below Pharaoh. And so he helps the nation navigate a famine. Well, that famine brings his 11 brothers back to him. One stayed at home, 10 come there, and they get reunited, they get reconnected, and Joseph ended up moving his whole family from the promised land to Egypt. And there they lived for nearly 400 years. And they thought everything was going good. It all seemed good. They had good jobs, good lives, stable economy, family, good food. Everything was well, it seemed. Ephesians 1:7 says this way. It says the sons of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly and multiplied and became exceedingly mightily. So the land was filled with them. Sounds good, right? Well, along comes another person who makes things hard. Now let me say this. In their goodness, God was part of their lives. So when they left what is now Israel and they go to Egypt, God was their source. In fact, he was known as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But then they get to Egypt, and over 400 years, they kind of blend in. And Egypt didn't believe in God, Yahweh. They had other gods. A lot of them were represented by animals. And so the Israelites just kind of began to mingle those gods in with God. And so God was there, but so were these other gods that they would worship and pray to. To put it in our current term, God was part of their life, but they relied upon other things. There were other things that they would run to instead of God. Does that sound familiar to you? Have you ever, when you face a situation, went to something else first and not God first? Or not God at all? That's what was happening. But it worked for them because there was no real problems. Everything was good, prosperous. Everything's great. Not a big deal. But what they really weren't paying attention to is they actually were in bondage, but they didn't know it because everything was going so well. They were comfortable enough. Things weren't bad enough for it to be a problem. But along comes another Pharaoh, about 400 years in the journey. And he becomes cruel. In fact, he looks at how big the Israelites are, and he's like, man, this is a problem. They keep getting bigger and multiply, and they're going to realize one day they're bigger and more powerful than us. And we need their labor. We need what they have. We need their tax money. So why don't we make them even more slaves? And became cruel to them. And as often goes with false reality, things now went bad. So the other gods weren't helping the Israelites. So what did they end up doing? They turned to the one true God. Does that sound familiar? Can I just make a pause and just kind of give a little teaching point? God will allow it to go bad for you. He'll absolutely allow it to go horrible for you. He will allow you to fall smack dab on your face. Why? So when you have nothing else left and nothing else works, you look up to God and go, can you help me? He goes, yeah, I've been waiting for you to depend upon me. And that's what the Israelites did. They now turned to God because He's the only one that could help. They forsaked all the other gods, and they admitted He was the answer. And God, because He's so compassionate, He answered with a deliverer named Moses, who was like a forerunner to Jesus. And God, through Moses, began to give them a picture. He said, I have a better reality for you than Egypt. And it's called the Promised Land. And he began to describe what this Promised Land was about. And it sounded really good. So they decide to go along with it, and they leave Egypt. Now, I'm making the story way too simple for time. But they go out and they get in the wilderness, and the wilderness is not fun. They're used to having buffets and fast food stores in Egypt. They can just go. Grocery store in every corner. They get out in the wilderness, there's no Taco Bell. There's no Burger King. There's no barbecue station. There's no Cane's Market. All right? There's no G&J's. No Snow Top. Right? There's nothing. And so they cry out for food. God sends this white bread. Great. I want fried chicken. Come on, somebody. And they don't appreciate it. And it's hard. They got to move stuff all the time. God's moving. And they begin to complain. And so it's not easy. And so they begin to say, we'd rather go back to Egypt. And all they could remember was the good life. What they forgot was the bondage they were in. It got so bad when Moses goes on the mountain to get the 10 Commandments. He was gone for 40 days. And they think homeboy left them. They're like, he's gone. So they tell Moses' brother, the chief priest, they say, make us a golden calf. And Aaron, I don't know what he's thinking he did. He's supposed to lead them to God, but he makes a golden calf. And here's what they said. This is the God that brought us out of Egypt. They told a golden cow, a statue. All that God had done, parting of the Red Sea, killing the Egyptians, providing food, providing water. The Bible says their sandals never even wore out. Man, that's a serious pair of shoes right there. But what they were saying is, this God, this calf brought us out of Egypt. What they were saying is, you, talking to the cow, you are my reality to give me what I'm looking for. They didn't believe God. In fact, it was God's biggest criticism of the Israelites was their unbelief. In fact, unbelief is the biggest sin. People say all sin is sin, and they're all about the same. No. Steal a penny, steal $1 million. A big difference. We can have a little bit of maybe wanting to do something we shouldn't, but unbelief is the bad one. Unbelief will send you to hell. And it's actually a form of pride. Was unbelief. I'm going to read you 4 sets of scriptures. This is God's criticism of the Israelites' unbelief. But I want you to look at these verses to see if they're relevant. Numbers 14:11. The Lord said to Moses, how long will this people spurn me? And how long will they not believe in me despite all the signs which I have performed in their midst? Isn't that a relevant question? How many times, sometimes, if we're honest, we can look back, we can say all that God did for us, but in the moment, we don't believe God is going to take care of us, that God's going to provide what we're looking for. Relevant question. Deuteronomy 1:32. But for all this is Moses in his speaking to the Israelites. He said, but for all this, you did not trust the Lord your God. Psalms 106, verse 24 and 25. It says, then they despised the pleasant land. What God's better. He had the promised land. It was better for them. Remember, God's wanting us, He's showing us a better reality of a better life, but it says they despised it. They did not believe in His word. They grumbled in their tents. Do we ever complain about God's way? Do we ever fuss at God? Do we ever maybe say this was an empty promise? I wonder if we've ever told God that He lied to us. They grumbled their tents and they did not listen to the voice of their Lord. Hebrews 3:19. So we see that they were not able to enter the better promised land because of unbelief. We can hear all day long the things of God, the better life. The answer is, do we believe? And if we don't believe, we will not be able to enter it. And what God's trying to do is paint a picture each week in all these messages of this better life. But the question is, do you believe God? Do you trust Him? Just like the Israelites, God has so much better for us, but we can absolutely miss it. And I don't want you to miss it. So I want to give you 3 simple lessons looking at the story of the Israelites. And I'll call it this, is how to experience God's better life. And the first one is to know the truth. To know the truth. Jesus said, if you know the truth, you'll find freedom. But what did He say was the key to knowing the truth? Continuing in His Word. You continue in His Word. And I'll just tell you, the enemy has a lie, but what's a cure for every lie? The truth. It's always the truth. And God calls His Word truth. Jesus said His teachings were truth. And you can't experience and know God's better reality unless you're spending time in the truth. Call it your Bible. And unless you're in it, you won't know it. And look, it's great to be here on Sundays, and I do my very best to present to you truth. Not just what I think. I want you to hear the truth because I want a better life for you. So I'm going to do my best, but this isn't enough, I promise you. You need to be students of the truth, but if you're not in the truth, you can't know the truth. And if you don't know the truth, you can't be free. And if you're not free, you're missing out on all that God has for you. See, God gave the Israelites commandments. And these commandments were to help them to know how to live because they had been in Egypt for so long, hundreds of years. It was ingrained in them. They grew up in that culture. We have the same problem. We were born into this world. It's all we've ever known. And depending on our upbringing, it may not have been evident to do things God's way and that God's way is best. We may have even grown up in church, but it's kind of like a pounded in us. Well, that doesn't sound very good. Nobody likes to be pounded upon. I don't want God's word beaten into me. And every time I show up at church, you worthless heathen sinner. And unless you turn, you're going to burn. I don't want that. I don't want that. But some of us grew up in that. They're like, I don't want God. I'm surprised you're even here. Thank you for being here, by the way. Hopefully we present it a little bit different way that you can go, okay, that sounds good. I actually want that. But we've grown up in this world. Some of us have never knew church. And so all we've known is the world. Some of us, like the Egyptians, it's just kind of God and world intermingled. We go to God for certain things, the world for other things. And so God's part of our life, and so we kind of think we're good. It's not that bad. I know I can go to Him when I really need something, but let me try these other things first to make me happy, to satisfy me, to give me security, whatever it is. But look at what God said to the Israelites, the same for us in Deuteronomy 12:28. He said, be careful to listen to all these words which I command you, so that it may be well with you and your sons after you forever. For you will be doing what is good and right in the sight of the Lord your God. He's trying to communicate it to you. But you got to put yourself in a position to hear. You got to be in the Word to know the truth. But then once you know it, and I think this becomes this big step, and now it goes back to what the biggest sin is and God's biggest complaint is, you have to trust the truth. Now, I think we all would say, I trust God. I believe His Word. Yeah, but remember what I told you earlier. Your routine, your responses, and your reactions determine your reality. They determine whether you really trust God and His Word. Not feelings, but believing that God's path is the right path. Now remember, we talked about last week, where do we get our beliefs from? And our beliefs dictate everything that we do. They come from trusted sources that are either close relationship or we feel they know more than us. And so we're just going to believe them. But our feelings are so powerful. And how things make us feel often dictate the direction we go. And these feelings show up in a lot of ways. Use a few examples. Eating food and buying things makes us feel good. It just does. Buying new furniture is fun. Buying the new car is awesome, right? Eating a great meal feels good. It brings us pleasure. Something like working really hard or even too hard makes us feel good about ourselves, but it also gets us to where we trust ourselves. Social media likes make us feel wanted, don't they? Does anybody else go down and see how many thumbs up you got? Does anybody else go through all the comments and you keep going back and see if there are more comments? Anybody else do that? I try to stay away from social media. I do not post very much because I know I can get the what'd they say? How many likes did I get? And why didn't they like me? Right? And I can either feel great or feel really bad about myself. But the feelings of being wanted are so powerful. Sometimes we can do good works to earn God's love, and so now we feel secure. We kind of compare a list of how much good we did versus how much bad we did. And we go, well, I'm in the good column, so I'm good with God. God's good with you because you're His child. And certainly He wants you to do good because doing good brings good. But He loves you. It's not about how much you earn. He's not tallying up a list to see if the good outweighs the bad, but sometimes we live that way, and so we feel secure with God. Sometimes we have the feeling of anger and offense, and it actually makes us feel in control. When we're angry at somebody, it's like, I've got something on you. I've got control. Or we stay offended at them. I'm control. I'm better.